Date, September 11th. Thanks for mentioning that, Eric, because that was real starting date for those of us from New York to really start thinking about preparedness and response. And I'm going to turn it over to Molly, who's going to talk a little bit about the timeline of disasters that we've put together.
Thanks. You can go to the next slide, Eric. And next.
There we go. Whoops.
And one more. Great, thank you. This is a timeline of the last 50 years of both natural and human-made disasters, and it's certainly not a comprehensive listing, but about 6 months ago, we worked with our partners at Surf Plus, the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, to just kind of look at how we got to where we are today, which is kind of the point of our discussion, which is this is becoming part of our professional discipline as arts leaders, is to recognize the importance of the arts in being served when they are impacted by disaster, but also in serving community in the both mitigation of risk and in the aftermath of disaster. So we start with my mentor and friend Jan, who was in Corning, New York in 1972 when Hurricane Agnes struck. We won't have time today, but she has an amazing and compelling story of the community public-private partnership response in that community that really helped it to build back better. And as you see moving along, all of the moments and events that you see on this timeline either had a great impact on the arts, or the arts were part of the response. So you move forward from 1972. Obviously, today we mark 23 years since the 9/11 attacks. In 2006, NCAPER was created in the aftermath of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and the really stark recognition at that point of the huge gaping holes in the response structure, both public and private, for artists and arts organizations. You'll see, I know many of you had state arts agency responses to many of these events that you see. And we come up to today, 2024, and a couple of important policy changes have happened in this time. Again, there is a growing body of research and understanding about the impact of the arts through disaster, a growing body of knowledge and skill set that we're developing. And most potently, I think we're seeing that on September 22nd, in just a couple of weeks, almost 20 years worth of work in advocating to fill some of these gaps in the structure are being filled by some reforms that FEMA has undertaken to make sure that individual artists and other self-employed workers are served by funding after disaster. So, this 50-year snapshot brings us to today, and our appreciation for all of you for being here to think about how we continue to build this into our policy and practice. We can go to the next slide. Just to give you a sense of the universe in which we are working, NCAPER is primarily, we refer to ourselves as a network of networks, but we do work in partnership with some folks who have been in this space for a long, long time, including Craft Emergency Relief Fund. They have tools and resources with which, if you're not familiar with them, really serve a broad array of individual and studio-based artists. Some newer partners, the Performing Arts Readiness Project, which launched in 2017. We are a partner with D-Plan and Arts Ready, the online planning tool. And then we also work hand in glove with our colleagues in the cultural heritage space, including the Alliance for Response, the National Heritage Responders, and the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. So this idea of networking and communicating that Eric teased us about at the beginning, I think is really important. This idea of relationships and networking and combining resources. So thanks. I'm going to toss it to Jan to take the next slide.
Thanks, Molly. You really framed NCAPER really well and the history, so I don't have to spend a lot of time here. I just wanted to say that although we started in 2006, after noticing that maybe 95% of the arts sector wasn't really served after Katrina and Rita, and somebody had to do something about it. We had to collaborate and work together to really advocate for more support. And we are excited that FEMA has listened a bit, and some changes in individual support for artists should be inaugurated at the end, towards the end of this month. We're waiting for that to actually happen. But in 2018, Mellon Foundation gave a grant to really establish some staff presence for NCAPER, and that's what's helped prepare. We have a website now that really has a lot of information. I encourage you to go to ncaper.org. And if we go to the next slide, it shows some of our standing steering committee members, and you see NASAA is one of them. Music Cares and Entertainment Community Fund, which is the former Actors Fund. All these organizations here have had and are what I call the enlightened ones, and have thought of supporting artists and arts organizations before and during and after disasters. So it was natural that we all came together and really work on all of this together. So we have been, on the next slide, shows some of the resources that we've been able, due to the support of the Mellon Foundation, Tremaine Foundation, and other organizations. All these resources are on ncaper.org, and they are PDFs, which you can download for free if you have a lot of ink in your printers. But anyway, the field guide was a National Endowment supported project where we kind of try to demystify what do you do when disaster strikes? How do you deal with FEMA? What are the things that you should be looking for? And these are both in Spanish and English, and are helpful when to have these copies, so that you don't have to rely on getting something printed or go online. Also, I'll point out on the left, the Arts Organizations at a Crossroads Toolkit really came out of the time we had in COVID, when organizations were going in and out of business, stopping. What are our legal ramifications and things like this. Molly was the one who interviewed gazillions of people and put this toolkit together, and it is meant not just to be for during COVID. It's really gives you materials and exercises and things like that to really look. I even thinking about succession planning and things like that. So I encourage you to look at that, only because there's one, my favorite one is the where you get staff people sharing what they do in their jobs. And we all know we don't have enough people to do the work. So if you have more than one person who understands what really goes on in a job, we also know that job descriptions don't tell everything, probably don't tell anything. But so it's a way of communicating within your staff members to really find out, what do you do daily? What do you do weekly? Where is this password or whatever? All these things. And of course, the Cultural Placekeeping Guide was published in 2015. And that's a way it's a guide for communities of cultural organizations and how we can work together before and during and after all disasters. So the next slide really points out and of what I really want state arts agencies to understand: the response calls. What happens is, for instance, like when Maui wildfires happened, very early on, we were communicating with the State Arts Council and anybody we knew in that area to try to connect and hear what was going on the ground, and have people on our steering committee and other funders to hear firsthand what these people were going through. I will tell you, the response calls when we had them in Kentucky, because there were two within 1 year, we had the tornadoes on the western side of the state, and then the flooding, severe flooding on the eastern side. And it is overwhelmingly just, your heart breaks hearing people. And then as we regular calls, we start seeing how they're responding and helping each other. And it's really wonderful. But if we had every state arts council, as Kentucky did, to really be part of pushing for these participations in these calls, it would be so helpful. It really made a difference. People were impressed. There's somebody from my state arts agency who cares enough to be on this call and listening to me and what I've gone through. It's important. I'll never forget, and I always, poor Michael Orloff from the National Endowment, he sat there in one of the Kentucky calls. It was his first call, and he didn't even move. I mean, I thought, oh my gosh, is he all right? Is he angry? Whatever. He said, I am just overwhelmed with grief for these people. And I said, good, remember that when you ask for money, because these people need help. And it's kind of, until you go through it and hear all this, the empathy is overwhelming. So that leads us to the state local activation teams. And really what that is we're trying to get every state to be part of response teams that we can activate. So I could actually just call Missouri, the Missouri SLAT people, and they would have everybody, they would be connecting, because the more input we have and the more collection of data that can go to FEMA to understand what the art sector is going through, the more response the art sector is going to have financially, hopefully. And the next program, and I'm pleased to see that a couple of you CAM coaches are on this call, so yay. Crisis analysis and mitigation coaching is, hi Molly, program was really started with Mellon Funds, and then the Tremaine Foundation kicked in, and we've worked with this wonderful group, AIR Collaborative, and they have a special facilitated training course and really system that they incorporated. The first year, the pilot program was like, how can we use the same methodologies to help arts responders work with their communities to engage communities in mitigation projects? We all know it's going to happen again, whatever it is, whether it's a hurricane or whatever. If we can do something to help make it better, and all that community has had input. And we're seeing, I heard today from the weatherman that Houma, Louisiana was being affected. And Houma was one of our mitigation projects where they decided what we want is a space where a place where we can gather and get information. So there is a 15-foot artist designed tree in somewhere in Houma that can withstand Category 5 hurricane winds. And it's a place where people can power up, and they can communicate with each other, and they can gather to get information, because many of them do not have Wi-Fi, even if it's working. So the CAM program has really done a lot, but you guys can do so much more. And just the next slide shows the network that we've built so far. We have 20 certified, and I think 15, which some of you are among that 15 are being certified by the end of this year. And you represent 22 states, District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. And there are 2 regional arts organizations that are represented in 8 state arts councils. So I'm really thrilled that you as an entity are really getting involved in this very important work that we're going to be, unfortunately, having to do more and more of. So I'll turn it back over to Molly. It's going to give some lessons in readiness.
Great. Thanks. I'm going to move through just some quick definitions to keep us kind of, again, framed in the same place. And as we go through these and we move into the some of what Sarah is going to share in our discussion, I encourage you to keep these 2 kind of objectives for today's conversation in mind, which are thinking through these definitions and actions. What are the effective roles that you inside a state arts agency can have? And then we'll be talking about how do we help to build your capacity to become more active in some of these. So these are definitions that I use that seem to be pretty simple and easy to use. 1, what is readiness? It's really being in a posture to be resilient and prepared for whatever crisis or emergency may arise. And although we've been dropping the word disaster a lot, we know that there are smaller everyday crises and emergencies that happen that can be just as troubling and just as potentially devastating to your agency or to one of your constituents as a large-scale disaster. So, kind of keep both sides of that in mind. And we also are looking at mitigation. So what are the ways that we can identify potential risks and then figure out how to minimize those and make the impact of a crisis as minimal as possible? Next slide. So we look at different types of crises, again, just to get our heads around it. There are human-caused crises as well as natural events, both accidents that can happen, whether those are, your server crashes or there's a chemical spill outside a theater, but there are also, unfortunately, intentional events, people seeking to do mischief and harm. And then we also look at crises in terms of forecast. Francine, everybody kind of knew it was coming their way, can take steps, but they're also the unseen, come out of left field, happen suddenly events. So, there's a pretty wide spectrum of events that fall within this, this work. Next slide. We look at, and all of our CAM coaches know this very well, that we look at emergency management in this cycle. Starting at about 10 o'clock, mitigation is this point of the first step is looking to minimize your risks, fill gaps. Moving into preparedness, knowing what you're going to do in a crisis, who's going to do what, who has responsibility. Response is in the immediate hours and days right after an event and usually deals with kind of life and health safety issues. But immediately after that is relief, getting to the community and the constituents that are affected with assistance to get things back up and running. And then we're really moving into business continuity in terms of recovery. So it's not just community recovery, but helping organizations to restore their operations, restore their programming, and get back again, hopefully better than before. I think Jan is wonderful at saying this shouldn't be a circle, this should be an upward spiral so that you learn and you debrief after something happens so that the next time we're in a better space and we're improved and again, more situated for the future. I think we have maybe one more slide. This, we just want to make you aware, if you aren't, that there are tools out there for both artists and organizations to help your constituents get ready. We hope you will share this information. Our colleagues at Serve Plus have a great longstanding tool, the Studio Protector, that really has applicability to many different types and disciplines of artists. And then the D-Plan Arts Ready tool, which was created by South Arts and was just updated in the last couple of years. So it's new and improved. And we have some great support from the Mellon Foundation to make it available to arts organizations for free for a year. And it allows them to build a customized readiness plan based on their particular shape, scope, scale of programs. So that's our framing. I'm going to turn it back to Eric to lead us to our next section.
Thank you very much, Molly. That was a great setup. I think, there are some great resources in there, and I see that you've posted some of those up in the chat when I couldn't see the chat, so I really appreciate that. We'll also make sure that we have resources available for you all after the session on our website. Now I'd like to bring Sarah on board and transition us into more of a moderated discussion. We have some questions here I'd like to ask the group, Molly, Jan, and Sarah. I think the first question is for all of you. Are there some effective roles that you see state arts agencies playing in emergency management? Since we haven't heard from Sarah yet, I'm going to go to her first, and then I'll circle back.
On the spot. So, so the question again, Eric, was how do you see state arts agencies playing a role in this work?
What's an effective role that state arts agencies can play in emergency management?
Well, so I guess I preface that to say that I am a newly certified CAM coach, so I'm new to this work, but I think it's an important role, and I think it's much like the role that state arts agencies are playing in the accessibility realm, right? How we can provide folks with resources to be able to work in their communities, to be ready and to mitigate and help communities think outside the box in terms of how they're doing that work. Yeah, and I think to be able to kind of be a resource for folks when they're thinking about that, how we can provide opportunities for folks to convene and discuss this work as well.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Molly, Jan, do you have anything to add on to that?
Oh,
Go ahead,
Jean,
Molly.
you're muted.
I tried to unmute and didn't do it. Sorry. I really think that what I had said before of having a response when an emergency happens, getting in touch with NCAPER and really being part of the process of trying to help your constituents. It is a wonderful service for artists and arts organizations. And also, if there's someone on your staff who can kind of be the point person, that's very helpful too. Emily Moses in Kentucky she was deputy director, but she really took the initiative and really did all the calling and making sure her constituents knew about the calls. I think the more you can promote that, also to encourage people in their general operating support grants, if they want to use some of the money to really be to look at or get some help, or even get a D-Plan Arts Ready plan going. I think that's important. I know that some people go, oh, well, if we ask them if they have a plan, they're going to think they should have. And I go, well, that's a good way to start, because they should. Because we do know and that for every dollar spent on preparing or preparation, you save, now it's up to $9 in recovery. That's a huge amount of money for a small arts, even a large arts organization. So, and also it's a way to really get people to involve their entire staff, which I think is always very helpful. What we're trying to do is create a culture of preparedness in the arts.
Thank you, Jan.
I'd like to second something that Sarah said, which is the power of convening. and of raising these issues for your constituents and your communities is a power that state arts agencies have. I'd also like to talk a little bit about being a partner and having a role in your state agency, in your state government structure. You know, we're not suggesting that you all need to become our emergency experts, but you all are arts experts, and taking that into conversations, for instance, with your state emergency management agency. If you don't yet have a relationship with them, that is something that it can be critical. It gives you access potentially to funding, gives you access to a table where decisions are being made for mitigation as well as for recovery. And it provides a way for all of the other work that state arts agencies are doing that can be part of this process. You know, community resiliency, community development, economic development, the creativity that artists bring to developing processes. All of those things are strengths that the state arts agency can bring to bear in conversations with other public agencies and public networks.
I'd like to just jump off of what Molly said too. I think that was one of the things that, you know, coming out of this, getting my CAM certification, you know, I've been thinking about what connections do I need to be making and relationships do I need to be building with other state agencies, I mean. And it was interesting because when I looked at it, I already had those relationships. And now, and those are kind of interesting relationships. I know people, but have I collaborated with them through my arts-based community and economic development work? Not really. But now all I had to do was go to my contacts at Environmental Justice in the Department of Environmental Protection and talk about how I've just been certified in this and how, you know, the creative sector and the arts and culture sector can play a role in this readiness and mitigation. And I thought for sure people would kind of be like, wait, what? But I was really pleasantly surprised that they understood it and they saw a place for the State Arts Council to be at the table in these discussions and in this planning. So now I have, I'm just in the process of, through my connections with environmental justice, building relationships with the folks at the Department of Emergency Management. So I'm really excited about that.
Thank you, Sarah, Molly, and Jan. Sarah, I want to follow up a little bit on that. As you mentioned, you're just gone through the CAM training. And I was wondering if you could give folks out there who may be thinking about going through the CAM training or just hearing about it, you know, why did you decide to go through the training? You know, how's it really building your knowledge base and really contributing to your everyday work at the Council on the Arts?
Sure. Well, so I guess just to give you some context, I've been with the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts for about 7 years. Prior to that, I was an Arts Council, County Arts Council Executive Director in Eastern North Carolina. So as you can imagine, for the almost 20 years I lived in Eastern North Carolina, we experienced a number of hurricanes. And I saw firsthand the devastation of a natural disaster and how the effect it has on communities, and most particularly the under-resourced, under-invested communities. And so, of course, as an Arts Council director in the county, we were able to get at the table with the Red Cross and those folks in emergency management and play a part in that. So I had some experience and context for wanting to do it. I think the other thing that really kind of spurred me on is when, you know, of course, we just came out of that time where we were all stuck at home and people were freaking out. And this kind of speaks to what Jan and Molly talked about. You know, it's kind of one of those times where we were all just trying to scramble and figure out how we could support organizations. My husband is a safety expert, so I ended up writing a reopening safely guide for state arts organizations across Pennsylvania. And it was really well received. And it was interesting. We did an informational webinar about it and over 300 people attended. So we knew that there was a need for these kind of ready-made resources or toolkits. And so that's something else that we're thinking about. You know, I was really happy to see that Jan And Molly shared those really great resources that live on their websites. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. I see a question just popped up in chat that I think resonates with a question I was going to ask anyway. So from Iowa Arts Council, we had a question about, organizations with limited capacity. I think this plays really into the question I want to ask all of you about how can state arts agencies, we know most of them are at their capacity, if not over, no matter what size their team. But what are some ways they can start building the capacity to play this effective role in emergency management for the arts within where they're sitting right now, without hiring an emergency manager on their team? How can they build that capacity?
I will tell you, NCAPER has no money to give away. We hardly have any money at all. So our resources really are helping people help themselves. I would say one of the best things that a state arts agency could do is to alert your community foundations in your particular state to be aware of the fact that they can be the best partner in rebuilding, helping the arts rebuild and heal communities. And that's kind of their focus anyway, is to help, a lot of them have donor determined or designated funds. We have found that wherever we've gone, it's been the community foundations that have stepped up and created relief funds. And remember that disasters are local. Therefore, the solutions to disasters need to be local. It's not FEMA coming in and telling you what to do. That is not what it's about. It's about saying what we want to do in our community to make it better. So I'd say that whenever you know of foundations and other funders in your state, just making sure that they're aware of what they can do. And we're trying to do that through Grant Makers in the Arts, the work we're doing with them as well. So it's an important public-private partnership.
I would add too, I'm a big believer in trying to find places to integrate this, just as, with accessibility, into what you're already doing, and just finding those moments so that it doesn't feel like some big, huge additional layer. So for instance, I put in the chat a link to our mailing list. Sign up for our mailing list. We will not blast you, but we do send out alerts when events are upcoming. We do at least a monthly blog with some kind of policy or story or issue that is an easy read. We try to keep it under a 10-minute read to just kind of keep it in your mind space. So I would recommend that. The other is to both task and empower different members of your staff. Whoever handles your individual artist programs, they should just have a little room in their portfolio to be thinking about artist preparedness and artist safety. Your organizational grants person, your communications person. I see Ann Wicks on here from NEVA. She's great at spreading the word. We will get you bite-sized information and tidbits and things that you can spread and share if you just be in touch with us. I would also say, build in this thinking when you're doing things that are already in place. When I was at South Arts, we had a readiness tip of the month at every single staff meeting. Sometimes it was a technical thing, sometimes it was a story, but it was something to just keep it on the radar. At your council meetings, you might have a story from a constituent, or you might be able to, share a model from another state that you might be considering. So I would say just find those ways to just keep this on an ongoing basis as starting to integrate it into the work that you're already doing throughout the agency.
Great. Thank you, Molly. Sarah, do you have something to add since you're going through this right now?
Oh, wow. Well, I guess I would say, I think it goes to what Molly said is, integrating it into what people are already doing. In my case, my work is community rooted. It's creative placekeeping work. And so I'm already have a pretty broad network across the state of artists, arts organizations, and then local government folks, community practitioners. doing community engagement work. And so for me, it just seemed like a natural extension of the work I'm already doing. And, you know, when we talk about capacity, I know there's a lot of different state arts councils on this call. I know for Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, you know, we have limited funding capacity. So one of the things we're really thinking very deeply about is how we can provide other resources of value to community. And, you know, with my you know, talking about the Reopening Safely guide I created, that, you know, it's that those kind of resources that we see are really important. And so, yeah, for me, it just seemed like a natural extension of the work that I was already doing. So it isn't stretching my capacity. It's just another really important tool I have in my arsenal. And I think that it's not something that needs to wait. I think it's something, Pennsylvania is not a place that has a lot of, you know, natural disasters. We don't suffer from hurricanes and that sort of thing. But, you know, one of the things our state is thinking about is wildfires, because the amount of, you know, natural wooded land we have and in our state. You know, we had a train derailment on the border in Ohio last year that really affected southwestern Pennsylvania communities that are already suffering from disinvestment because of the coal industry leaving. And so there's a lot of different areas that I'm working in and people that I have contact with that, yeah, I guess but I'm making my answer really long, but at the end of the day, it just seemed like a natural extension of the work that I'm already doing.
Thank you, Sarah. Go ahead, Jan.
I just saw Charles had a question about festival safety, and I encourage you to go to performingartsreadiness.org. They're one of our partners, and they have the art of mass gatherings. And what it is, it's like a tutorial on how to make festivals greener and safer and better for the community. And there's a lot of good stuff in there, and free webinars that you can refer to, but also there is staff that on the Performing Arts Readiness Project, I work on it as well, but that have done a lot of safety checks for festivals, and it's been really helpful. Also, Molly, is it the Levitt Foundation that has all those festivals, and they're also working with PAR on getting their festivals safer for all attendees and for the people putting them on. And I think somebody else mentioned something about mental health.
Yeah.
I think one of the most encouraging, because let me tell you, after living through what I did 50-something years ago with Hurricane Agnes, the amount of mental health crises that went up in the community after suffering all that. I mean, my home was under 15 feet of water, and that was like one of thousands. So it is important that all the stress that people are, first of all, people gather together and work together, but then there's that period of really mental health problems. And I want to point out that Bill O'Brien at the National Endowment, the Creative Forces, have actually realized that they had been working with the military on PTS, and they realized that the work bringing in artists to the community and working with the constituents, they went to Uvalde this past year and worked with the people there to help them talk about what they had gone through. And so I think there are a lot of ways, but it's very important. The mental health aspect of all this is something that the arts can really help so, you know, as state arts agencies, get to know your mental health people.
I want to keep going with our, chat questions from people there, but I want to ask the members of the audience a question too. So in chat, I'm going to throw a question up there. Just answer it in chat, and I'll bring it back up, and we'll get back to it after we've kind of answered some of your other questions. This is just going to be a question about what might be your first tangible step as a state arts agency to build capacity or help your communities. Don't think too hard about it. Just think about what's practical and comes top of mind. I want to go back up in the chat a little bit. We had a question a little earlier on about, are there resources that you can recommend that'll help an institution or agency in developing its first ever disaster plan? Just on your site or elsewhere, some people to contact.
I will get on my soapbox a little bit because one of that is a service that NCAPER offers, so I don't want to be self-serving, but we work closely with Performing Arts Readiness. They have, for the last 3 years, offered grants to individual arts organizations to develop readiness plans. Fortunately, that funding, I think, has been pretty much committed. They do have an array of organization-specific sample plans that have come out of those consultancies on their website, performingartsreadiness.org. They will give you the caveat, and I will repeat it, that these are not a plug and play kind of thing. These are not samples that are shared so that an organization can do, universal search and replace. But what they are, they can give you a sense of what should be in a plan, and the array of different types of plans. My personal belief is that a plan is the result of an intentional decision-making process about what you'll do and who will do it after a crisis. So there is no kind of cookie cutter. But certainly those plans are a way to just start the juices flowing in terms of thinking about what it is. And we at NCAPER would be happy to try to connect you with other or your constituents with other either free or low-cost resources. Arts Ready is also the free planning tool that's great for small and mid-sized entities to develop a customized plan. And it's kind of do it at your own speed. So those are certainly some resources. Jan might have others.
Well, the D plan, really, if you open an account and get a fee waiver, whatever, just the risk assessment questions that you have to answer are so enlightening. In other words, the process becomes the product, because what happens is not everything will apply to your organization. However, there will be things that you do not understand, didn't even think of. I mean, what happens performing arts, we talk about collections and performing arts organizations. Well, we don't have collections. Well, yes, you do. You have costumes, you have instruments, you have sets, and it gets people thinking a little differently. It also, again, in organizations, it's a way to use your staff resources, what they bring to the table in, say, production, from the production director head space. I always tell everybody the CEO is the least important person in this process, and to really get people involved. And Molly and I just did a session of 15 people actually logging on, creating their accounts in Kentucky, and they were going through all the questions, and they were having like these enlightened moments that were really, really important. And I was so glad to see that and that's pretty much free. I mean, it's free for the first year, $59.40 for every year after. That's not going to break the budget, even the smallest dance company. So, just doing the work and making this part of the way an organization operates it's so helpful and smart.
Thank you very much. Sarah, do you have anything to add, or?
I think they hit it. I really do. I think they covered it all.
Great. I'm going to move on to another question. I think this is a clarification question. I think I have a couple of clarification questions I'd like to ask. So one question coming across is there a difference in the way you approach human-made and natural disasters, or are they largely the same? Or is it maybe specific to the event? Are there kind of overlap there. Do you have some advice as to what's the difference there? Are there different approaches?
Well, we talk about all hazards planning because there's certain low-hanging fruit that everybody needs to be aware of. You're never going to be able to predict what might happen. One time we were going to speak in Cleveland and we never have any earthquakes. That morning they had an earthquake. So, it's like, expect things to happen. And it's like, if you're in a state of readiness as an organization or as an individual artist, even, what happens is that during the time when you can't think, you're running around like a crazy person, you've already put some stuff in place that will immediately draw you into taking positive steps. We found that during COVID, those organizations that had gone through readiness planning jumped right immediately at, like, how can we deliver programs and services now that we're closed? And staff knew if they were going to be paid or not. They also knew who was responsible for what, who was the spokesperson. All that stuff is ironed out previous to anything. So it really, the response might change, but it's all going to be like, how can you survive this and actually come back stronger? So I just encourage everybody to walk through this and really work on it. And especially with crisis communications, that's an important subsector or subsection of a plan, just like succession planning is. So.
And Karen made a good point in the chat to kind of follow up on that. I think the only distinction is that there are resources that only become available when there is a presidentially declared disaster. But the state needs to ask for that help. It doesn't automatically come. So when you can be at the table advocating for the needs of the arts sector as part of that response, that can be very helpful. And often there are events that happen that don't rise to that level. So again, as Jan mentioned, those relationships with the local community foundations, with your local arts councils, all of those really come into play, whether it's a human caused or natural disaster, but something that is at a community level or a state level and doesn't rise to a presidentially declared situation.
And also we do have rapid response forms that can people can, organizations, artists can fill out, and what happens is that information then goes to HENTEF, which is the Heritage Emergency National Task Force, all these acronyms. And that helps build the story of why arts and cultural organizations and people need to be supported, because we do so much work, and this is the amount of damage that has been done. But if you don't have that information stored somewhere, and you're going to have to start at the beginning, and then it's usually too late to get support.
Thank you. I have one more question that's also kind of in a distinction. Does emergency management response look different in rural and urban areas? If so, what should state arts agencies be aware of when they're serving both their urban and rural communities?
Think counties. That's where the money is too. The emergency management, they're the people really calling the shots. They're the people who will then say, okay, in Corning, New York, in Steuben County, they alert state people and say, we're really in trouble here. So get to know your county reps, and they're the ones that have a lot of control. And also there's this national, they call it NVOAD, National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. You should know in your state, there will be state VOADs as well. And these are like, well, Red Cross and things like that, but also many of, religious organizations, you know, like Baptist Church or whatever. They'll have representatives who, I mean, that's what they do. They help people after a disaster. So they're really a lot of wonderful resources in throughout each county, each state.
Molly, do you have anything to add?
Well, I just wanted to again reiterate, and Sarah might have some thoughts on this too, but this idea that all disasters are local, so all response is local. And so I'm always remember the story that Cinda Holt of Montana used to talk about, which is, you know, she had an uncle that was involved in emergency and knew if something happened, you know, he goes and buys up all the bread, you know, within like 50 miles and brings it to a central place. And if we just kind of lend that mindset, because in rural communities, it's about that helping each other and jumping in. And that kind of spirit, I think, is really important wherever you are, that in a disaster, that kind of spirit and connection is really critical to making the response as healthy and as effective as possible.
And as far as emergency management, you want to be at the table, not on the menu. I mean, that's really, really what we're saying here is you need to, as arts agencies, say, we're really important for what you do and look what we can do to help when we help you with your work. And you know, in the meantime, then you might get money for, you know, because FEMA has money if they're performing arts centers that can serve as FEMA sites for information and things like that. That's helpful. Artists to be paid. We had Maui artists paid for doing taking the children of people filling out FEMA forms and stuff. They were doing arts education programming and they were paid for it. You know, these are artists who had lost 2 years of their work, you know, gone up in flame. So it's important to know how to activate more support for your constituents. And it's just being there, being the voice.
Thank you. I know we're running close to time, so I want to shout out some of the great ideas that have come across from all of you about some tangible first steps to take. I'm seeing a lot about sharing resources, whether that's on your website or emails that cross your desk and then forwarding on to people, and just providing those resources and making sure they're out there for your constituents. I also see a number of comments here about, you know, getting at the table in a variety of ways, like getting to know your state's emergency preparedness people within your own government, their emergency management division, and making sure you're on those calls, making sure you're there. Seeing a lot of work about, mentioned a couple of times about how you've, you know, in the past, you've issued emergency relief grants. So having a process in hand or know what that process might look like in advance. So if something comes up, you're not fumbling around trying to develop a process while you're flying the plane. You're actually have it in set and you know, kind of like, okay, this is what we're going to do in an emergency. So this idea of playing the role as a convener and just being a space that, you know, setting up phone calls or, you know, events or something where people can come and talk about their experiences, receive resources and grants, things like that. These all really fit well into the mission of state arts agencies. I think these are all great kind of low-hanging fruit, relatively easy steps for you all to take without really affecting your capacity too much. I don't want to speak for you, but it feels like it falls right in line with things you're already doing to me. Before I let you go, I want to thank Jan, Molly, and Sarah. Thank you for sharing your expertise and experience. I also want to pump up that Jan and Molly are coming to the assembly. So if you're coming to the assembly, they will be running on Saturday, October 26th, a special emergency preparedness for state arts agencies session. We're going to have some great folks in that session. We're going to have an individual from GIA, someone from FEMA, and someone from Puerto Rico who has worked on cultural resource and heritage response. They're putting together some scenarios. So it's going to be a bit of a practicum where we're going to actually have people run through scenarios where you're going to get to think about, what would my state arch agency do in this? It's going to be a fun session. And I'm thrilled to have it. It's one of my favorite sessions I've helped develop throughout my time here at NASAA. So if you're coming to Assembly, save that on your docket to join us. With that, it's 4 o'clock. We're ending right on time. So how rare is that? Thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate this. This has been a great session.